Good day, everyone. Today, we will continue to discuss the evolution of Philippine Constitution. By the way, I'm Philip A. Suitado together with my partner, Steve Ryan Mangubat. So first, we are going to tackle about 1943 Second Philippine Republic Constitution. Second, we have 1973 Constitutional Authoritarianism. Third, 1987 Constitution after martial law. So 1943 Second Philippine Republic Constitution. The Second Philippine Republic was established during the Japanese occupation of the Philippines. So it was established during the time ang mga Japanese nag-invade sa Philippines. At the outset of the occupation, the Japanese government established a military administration over the Philippines, as well as the Philippine Executive Commission, composed of several pre-war Filipino political leaders. The Kalibapi, or Kapisanan ng Paglilingkod sa Bagong Pilipinas, was also organized, designed to be the sole and exclusive political organization in the Philippines. On June 16, 1943, Premier Hideki Tojo promised independence to the Philippines. The Kalibapi would then form the Preparatory Committee on Philippine Independence, or PCPI, which was tasked with drafting a new constitution. The new constitution was approved by the Preparatory Committee on Philippine Independence on September 4, 1943, and ratified by the Kalibapi on September 7, 1943. On October 14, 1943, in ceremonies in front of the Legislative Building in Manila, the new republic was inaugurated, and Jose P. Laurel, the chairman of the Preparatory Committee, assumed office as president. On September 21, 1944, President Laurel proclaimed martial law in the Philippines. It came into effect on September 22. And on September 23, 1944, Laurel proclaimed that the Philippines was in a state of war with the Allied powers, but this was never ratified by the National Assembly. The Japanese brought the Laurel government to Baguio in December 1944, and a small remnant of that government was taken to Tokyo in March 1945. Laurel formally dissolved the Second Republic on August 17, 1945, 2 days after Japan surrendered to the Allies. When the Commonwealth government was restored on Philippine soil on October 23, 1944, Field Marshal Douglas MacArthur, as the military commander, had issued a proclamation nullifying all acts of Philippine Executive Commission and the Second Republic. The Supreme Court of the Philippines reiterated this nullification in a decision on September 17, 1945, but pointed out President Osmeña recognized the validity of some judicial acts of non-political nature. The Supreme Court categorized the Philippine Executive Commission and the Second Republic as a de facto, actual, whether by right or not, government. In contrast to the de jure, meaning rightful or legitimate status of the Commonwealth government. So that is why many people call the 1943 Second Philippine Republic Constitution as the short-lived constitution, because it was categorized as a de facto, and because Americans also came back to the Philippines and gave us independence, which that means that there is no laws or regulation from the Second Republic are legally recognized at that time. President Laurel has been included in the roster of Philippine presidents since the 1960s. So that is how the 1943 Philippine Constitution created. So it was the time of the Japanese occupation. Oh, no. So muna siya ang Second Philippine Republic Constitution. 1973 Constitutional Authoritarianism. In 1965, Ferdinand E. Marcos was elected as president, and in 1967, Philippine Congress passed a resolution calling for constitutional convention to change the 1935 Constitution. And President Marcos was re-elected in 1969. The election of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention were held on November 20, 1970, and the convention began formally on June 1, 1971. Before the convention finished its work, martial law was declared. Marcos cited a growing communist insurgency as reason for the martial law, which was provided in the 1935 Constitution. With Marcos as president, the direction of the convention turned, with accounts that the president himself dictated some provision of the Constitution, manipulating the document to be able to hold onto power for as long as he could. And on November 29, 1972, the convention approved its proposed constitution, where the constitution was supposed to introduce a parliamentary-style government, where legislative power was vested in a unicameral National Assembly, with members being elected to a 6-year term. The president was to be elected as the symbolic and a ceremonial head of state chosen from the members of the National Assembly. The president would serve a 6-year term and could be re-elected to unlimited number of terms. That is why President Marcos end up 21 years sa pag-sit niya sa government. Executive power was relegated to the Prime Minister, who was also the head of government and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, who was also to be elected from the National Assembly. President Marcos issued Presidential Decree number 73, setting the date of the plebiscite to ratify or reject the proposed constitution on November 30, 1972. So muning time nga ibutuhan ang katong gi-propose nga constitution sa gi-propose ni na constitution sa panahon ni President Marcos. And this plebiscite was postponed later on since Marcos feared that the public might vote to reject the constitution. Instead of a plebiscite, citizen assemblies were held from January 10 to 15, 1973, where the citizens coming together and voting by hand decided on whether to ratify constitution, suspend the convening of the interim National Assembly, continue martial law, or place moratorium on election for a period of at least several years. The president on January 17, 1973 is issued announcing that the proposed constitution had been ratified by an overwhelming vote of the members of the highly irregular citizen assemblies. The Constitution was amended several times. In 1976, citizen assemblies once again decided to allow the continuation of martial law, as well as approve the amendments an interim batasang pambansa to substitute for the interim National Assembly. The president to also become the prime minister and to continue exercise legislative power until martial law was lifted and authorized the president to legislate on his own on an emergency basis. In 1980, the retirement age of members of the judiciary was extended to 70 years. In 1981, the parliamentary system was formally modified to a French-style semi-presidential system where executive power was restored to the president, who was once again to be directly elected, and executive committee was to be created composed of the prime minister and 14 others that serve as the president's cabinet, and some electoral reforms were instituted. In 1984, the executive committee was abolished and the position of the vice president was returned. So aya pa na balik ang posisyon sa vice president in 1984. So after all amendments introduced, the 1973 Constitution was merely a way for the president to keep executive powers, abolish the Senate, and by any means never acted as a parliamentary system, instead functioned as an authoritarian presidential system, with all the real power concentrated in the hands of the president with the backing of the Constitution. So, nagdugay gid si President Marcos because mga nito sa isa sa naa sa Constitution sa gipropose nga Constitution is katong pwede ra siya ma-elect in pila ka terms nga gusto niya mudagan. So, mutong naabot gid siya nga 21 years. This pag-abot din sa 1980s, no? Since as Marcos amassed power, naging power si Marcos gyud nagunit sa power gyud, no? And tungod ana many people were discontented na sa iyang pagmamalakad. The tide turned swiftly when in August 1983, Benigno Aquino Jr., the opposition leader of President Marcos, was regarded as the most credible alternative to President Marcos. And in that year, he was assassinated while under military escort immediately after his return from exile in the United States. There was widespread suspicion nga ang order sa pagpatay ka Aquino was came from top levels of the government and the military. This event caused nga the coming together of the non-violent opposition against the Marcos authoritarian regime. So Marcos was then forced to hold snap election a year early, and said election was marred by widespread fraud. Marcos declared himself winner despite international condemnation and nationwide protests. A small group of military rebels attempted to stage a coup but failed. However, this triggered what came to be known as the Edsa People Power Revolution of 1986, as people from all walks of life spilled onto the streets under the pressure from the United States of America, who used to support Marcos and his martial law. The Marcos family fled into exile. His opponent in the snap election, Benigno Aquino Jr.'s widow, Corazon Aquino, was installed as president on February 26, 1986. So that is what happened during the presidency of Marcos. So that is the 1973 constitutional authoritarianism.
Hello everyone, I will continue to tackle 1987 Constitution after martial law. President Corazon Aquino's government had three options regarding the Constitution. So first, revert to the 1935 Constitution, retain the 1973 Constitution, and be granted the power to make reforms or start anew and break from the vestiges of a disgraced dictatorship. So they decided on a new constitution that, according to the president, should properly embody the Filipino people's goals and ideas. President Aquino declared a constitutional constitution in March 1986, which would exist for a year while Constitutional Commission created a permanent constitution. Preamble and 18 self-contained articles begin the Constitution. It declared the Philippines a democratic republican state in which sovereignty rests in the people and all government authority derives from them. Congress also has the ability to declare war with 2/3 vote in both the upper and lower houses. So there are three branches of government. First, executive branch. The president and his cabinet, whom he picks, lead the executive branch. The president is the chief executive and the head of the state, but his power is constrained by major checks from the two other co-equal branches of government, particularly in times of emergency. So the legislative power reside in a Congress is divided into two chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The 24 senators are elected at large by popular vote and are limited to 2 6-year terms in a row. So last, the judicial branch decides the constitution of federal laws and resolves other disputes about federal laws. However, judges depend on our government's executive branch to enforce court decision. Courts decided what really happened and what should be done about it. Attempts to change constitution. So naay mga nangitabo sa una para mag-attempts to change the 1987 constitution, at it was under the President Fidel D. Ramos. The 1987 constitution provided for three methods by which the constitution can be amended. So naay tulo ka possible way methods na pwede otrohon ang constitution, such are the Constituent Assembly, Constitutional Convention, and People's Initiative. So ang tulo ka pamaagi ani kay need og adoption sa vote sa kadaghanan sa isang bansang referendum. So the first attempt was in 1995 when the Secretary of National Security Council, Jose Almonte, drafted a constitution, but it did not succeed. The second attempt happened in 1997 when a group called PERMA, People's Initiative for Reform, Modernization, and Action. So nag-file silang petition para mag-change ang constitution through gathering signature sa mga voters, but the Supreme Court under Chief Justice Andres Nervasa dismissed the petition. So it says that the People Initiative mode does not have enabling law for revision or change in the 1987 Constitution. So, President Duterte advocated federalism in the Philippines during the 2016 presidential elections, claiming that it will distribute money more fairly throughout the country rather than concentrating it in Manila. So, the country capital. As a form of government, a central governing authority, and constituent political units constitutionally share sovereignty.